Hey everybody, Dr. J here once again with another check-in. Today we're going to discuss the sexual harassment ethical decision case. There were a couple of characters in that, Susan and Nancy. Nancy was sexually harassed by Susan, and you were asked what would you do in that situation when Nancy is your right hand employee, someone who you can trust, count on, depend on. She's your eyes and ears. And Susan also is a good employee, your best high performing employee. And if Susan were to, if when Susan sexually harasses Nancy and Nancy comes to you in confidence, do you report the case and jeopardize losing this high performing employee, Susan, who's the accused, and have your right hand person, Nancy, lose their trust in you because you've reported it even though she did not want you to? Or do you not report the case, thereby protecting Nancy, protecting what she believes to be her right to privacy because she is your right hand person and she came to you in confidence? So, as you should know by now, and many of you got this answer correct, the correct answer is to report Susan to Human Resources, to report the incident. So, the reason behind this is what's most important. That's the main takeaway. And many of you got the answer correct, but some of the steps that led you to that correct decision, I would like to address some of that so that you can have an accurate idea of why you would report Susan to Human Resources, and also what are some do's and don'ts regarding the steps in doing and in proceeding in that fashion. One, Susan may not, if Susan continues to harass Nancy and you don't report it, that could prompt Nancy to experience a lot of stress in the organization. She can begin to disengage from the organization, lose her identity with the organization as well, and ultimately can result in her intentions for her to quit. Also, if Nancy does decide to report it later on, it will be discovered that you did not report the first incident, and that would make you liable and risk your reputation and job as well. And so, when we look at it from a logical standpoint, as far as its impact on the organization, if you choose not to report it, those are some major implications that can occur. Susan can continue to harass Nancy and other people. Nancy can experience high stressful situations at work and ultimately decide to leave the organization. Or also, you could implicate yourself if Nancy decides at a later time to report it and it's revealed that you did not report the incident when it was first reported to you. Here's some other things I want you to consider, though, too. Many of you talked about it being the ethical thing to do, and I think some students were under the impression that Nancy does have some right to privacy regarding the decision to report it or not report it. In reality, when you are an employee within an organization, your rights to privacy are virtually non-existent. And so the idea that Nancy has this right to privacy to not report it, from a legal standpoint, really is just not the case. Also, not only is reporting it an ethical thing to do, from a legal standpoint, you also really don't have a choice in the matter because you as a manager are essentially a mandated reporter. When you visit the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's website on the topic of sexual harassment in the workplace, there are statements that say that employers may be held liable for neglecting to act on reports of sexual harassment. What that means is that once you are aware of any type of sexual harassment going on in the workplace, it is your obligation to report it. Now, many of the students also described ways in which they would address the situation. So not only did they recommend reporting it, but they discussed ways in how they would address Susan, talk to Susan about her actions, or even try and create a meeting or ask questions, follow up, investigate what happened. This is something that I strongly encourage you not to do. Although most organizations should have a policy in place to deal with this situation, fortunately, this does not involve you as a manager in the majority of the time. Human resources and the legal department should have a policy and a procedure and protocol already in place that usually doesn't involves your role as a manager in only a limited fashion. So I would just let human resources and the legal department do their job. You report it, let them take it from there. What you should not do under any circumstances: one, do not try to investigate the matter yourself. You should assume that Nancy's claim is valid and report what she tells you while letting her know that you take her claim seriously and you're very supportive. Also, you should not inform under any circumstances or ask Susan about Nancy's claim. Because if and when human resources prompts an investigation, you do not want to be perceived as someone tipping Susan off or tampering with the investigation. Also, Susan may not be discreet about the situation. You don't really know how she might react, and she might discuss it with coworkers, or even worse, she might try to retaliate against Nancy, which can make matters even worse. Lastly, do not discuss it with anyone. That is a big no-no, a big don't. This entire incident should remain confidential to protect the privacy of both Nancy and Susan. That means do not discuss it with other supervisors, other managers, and I would not even discuss it with your upper management, your direct report, who you report to, before having a conversation with human resources. So the epilogue for all of this, I'm sure you're interested in knowing what the outcome is. This is actually based on the true story while I was a manager. The name situations, of course, have been changed to and altered to slightly protect those and maintain the anonymity of those involved. But what happened was Susan was ultimately placed on probation after a corrective action meeting and transferred to a different region. But Nancy and we remain friends to this day, even though she did not want me to report it. I mean, she virtually was literally in my office crying tears, begging me not to report it. But I knew at that time that it is something that I had to do. And thankfully, I only knew that because we had sexual harassment trainings on probably about a quarterly basis within that organization. Had it not been for those trainings, I may have not reported it, believing that I was maintaining the privacy of Nancy, as one of my right-hand employees. But because of the sexual harassment trainings that I was involved in, I knew otherwise. This was when I was a young manager. This happened more than 15 years ago. And one of the things that really struck me was that when I did report it to Human Resources, I was instructed not to tell anyone about it, not to approach Susan, not to sit them down in an office and try and figure out what happened, but to just stay totally quiet about it. And I'd say there was approximately maybe 2 to 3 weeks where they had a covert investigation where there were even human resources professionals that covertly observed Susan while at work. And this is even before they even approached her and informed her that there were allegations against her. And ultimately, there was a corrective action meeting, and she was assigned to a different region, like I mentioned before. To this day, Nancy is very grateful that we handled that situation in the way that we did. So I hope you enjoyed reading that case. All of you got the correct answer, but at the same time, the way and how you thought about the case and the process that you believe should be utilized in that correct answer needed to be addressed. But it's good to make those mistakes in class instead of making those mistakes in the workplace. So, I hope you enjoyed this case, and until next time, have a good day. Peace out from Dr. J.